Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how you can develop a Spring Boot application, then build and test and run that application locally. After that, I will show you how you can use CI/CD to build and test your application, and finally deploy your application into a production environment. When developing your application, writing code should be your main task. Everything else should be automatic, like testing and building and deploying it into production. And that's what I'm going to show you after developing your application, how you can do this automation and see your application in production. So with that, let's get started. So for that, first I'm going to go to start.spring.io. Here, select your Gradle system. I'm choosing Gradle Kotlin and Kotlin programming language, and I'm choosing this dependency: web, JPA, Postgres, Docker Compose, and test container. This gives us initial containers that we can use to test and run our application. All right, with that, let's generate the project and open it with your IDE. So yeah, initially you're not going to see all this. I added this part, so you're only going to see this part. I added this part to make things quick. These are very simple entity classes, DTO classes, and repository and services, uh, and some controller. I've also added another controller. This just again very simple. It gets the books from the database and gets book by ID and create new book. So I already have several videos how you can create these controllers and services and repository and how you can access database. If you are unfamiliar with this code, then please check out my other videos. So with this, you can now run the application, but before running the application, you need to set up the schema. So here we are mentioning how our entity should look like, and we just defining here the schema for the database: book, ID, title, author, simple table. And also in application YML, we are putting the database information. Again, this should be very familiar: host, port, DB, username, and password. And where you are going to get this information is, since we selected the Docker Compose in here, it already gives us the information. So if you open Docker Compose, you'll see all the information over here. I just copy pasted those over here. All right, with this, let's run the application. And at this point, we should be able to do some GET request. Initially, it's empty. It's expected, but let's create some POST request. Let's create another book using the POST request. Now, if we do the GET request again, we should see the list of books. All right, next up, let's upload this code into GitHub. So let's create the repository. And just push the code over here. So I have already committed this code. I just need to push it. Also, the URL is also set. So after push is done, we have the code in GitHub. Now let's create an action that's going to run our test and build the jar file. So for that, we're going to select action. From here, we're going to search for Gradle. Select this one. So Gradle by default gives us many of the code that we can use. We're not going to use this for now. And here, let's remove this comment and let's go over what it says. So first, we're going to define how this workflow is going to run. So it says on push to master or on create a pull request that pointing to master, this workflow is going to run. Where it's going to run a with the latest OS, and then we are checking out the code, and we are selecting Java 21, so we're gonna update that. Finally, we are gonna add a line to allow execute permission to Gradle. It's very simple. Just have to type chmod plus x w, and that's it. Commit the changes, and as soon as we do that, if you go back to action, you'll see there is an action is running. If you click and select build, this is going to build and test our application. So build is successful, it should be green. Now go back to our code editor and let's get back the workflow file that we have just created. And in here, next we are going to create a Docker image from our application that we are going to publish into Docker Hub. So when we run build, we see this build folder, and in the lib folder, we see this jar file. Now we want to upload this jar into Docker Hub using a Docker image. We also have to define how this Docker image is created. For that, we are going to use this Docker file. Here again, I have already defined what image I am going to use, what port to expose, because we did not define anything by default, it's port 8080, and then copy the file from this build directory to user app directory, finally set the work directory, and at last the entry point. So it's just going to run normal jar file, java minus jar, and the file name. Now to upload it to Docker Hub, first let's go to Docker Hub, create a repository, give it a name, and we're going to add this into a new GitHub action or steps. For that, first we need to GitHub Marketplace, search for Docker Publish, and from here we're going to select this one, Publish Docker, get this step, go back to our action. Let's go it from here and add this new action. Now, here we need to put our repository name that we just created. And we need to put this information into GitHub. So for that, go to settings, secrets, action, and repository secrets. So Docker username is the username over here. And the password, your password. This is the password that you use to log into your Docker Hub. With that, let's commit our changes. Go back to the action, see the new action. As you can see from the log that Docker image is created and uploaded to Docker Hub. So now if we go to Docker Hub and refresh, we should see the latest image. Now we want to deploy this image into a cloud environment. So I am choosing render, but it should be similar to other environment like AWS or Google Cloud. So in render, you want to create a new service. Select the image. So first here you say docker.io to get it from docker.io registry, and then your image name that you just created. Next, click connect. Select the one you want to use. I'm gonna go with the free one for now and add the environment variable. So in our application, we have this database information. So it's in the local host. That's not going to work. So we have to set up a remote database server. So for that, I'm gonna use Neon. Let's configure this Neon database over here. First, put the variable names. So in Neon, when you can create a free Postgres database, once you created that, you will get the credential from here. Just add those information into render. Once you put the credential, click on add variable, and finally deploy web services. Okay, deployment is done. Now we should be able to access our app from this URL. We get the hello world, and we also get the books endpoint. The books I already saved previously. Now, as you have seen, this was done a bit manually. Now, what we want to do is as soon as we add some code, it should be automatically deployed to this render platform. For this, we need to get the deploy hook. Open your GitHub and go back to the secret. Add a new secret called render hook and put the URL over here. Add the secret. And now in your code, let's add a new step. Which is called deploy to render. And here you just mention a CURL, and the URL we just defined over here with the name render hook. And that's it. And just to make sure we are getting the latest one, let's change it to render. Commit and push. Similar to before, a new action will pop up. And once it's done, we should be able to see this deployment into the render. So let's wait. As you can see, it's successfully done. And if you scroll up a bit under the deploy to render, you'll see this new value. So when you get this ID, that means render accepted the request to deploy a new version. Now, if you go back to render, go back to your application, and you will see a new deployment has started again. So this should get the latest version from the Docker Hub and deploy it into the render environment. Deployment is done. Our changes are live. Now, if you go back to this URL, This URL works as before, but if we go to the root URL, we should see the changes as hello render that we just changed from our code. So yeah, that's it. That's all I wanted to show you in this video, how easily you can test, build your application locally and also in a cloud environment with CI/CD, and finally deploy your application. I hope you liked it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments below. I will upload this code into GitHub and the link will be available in the video description. And that's it. Have a nice day. Bye bye.